Okay, migration. Migration. We will be doing a handful of flashcards today. It looks like we're probably going to do upwards of 10 flashcards, so get a good pile of them ready. All right, here we go. Migration. Migration is a pretty simple concept. It means you're changing residence that is intended to be permanent. So you and I, when we come to school every day, we are not migrating because there's not the idea of permanence. I'll get to what an example of that would be here in a few minutes. First, though, it's really important that you understand the difference between these two definitions. Immigrant, IM, immigration, or an immigrant is the movement of non-native people into a country in order to settle there. So I like to think of these guys are coming in, IN, okay? They're coming in, I for in, okay? They're coming into the place. Emigration, emigration, they are leaving a country or state to settle somewhere else, or they're leaving their native location. So E for these guys would be exit, okay? They're exiting their location. So emigrant, M is exit, immigrant is IM for coming in, okay? That's the difference between those two. And you really do kind of have to force the enunciation, but be careful when you're writing these. You should know the difference. So on your flashcard, I would definitely, bold those two first letters to make it so that it's really forceful so that you remember. Okay, migration. International migration basically means they're crossing borders. And what I mean by borders is state borders and not US state, Mexico to Florida, New Mexico to Florida, or from Utah to Idaho. What we do mean is country borders. This is a really fun graphic because you can see here how many people are leaving Central and South America and they are migrating where? Where are all these people headed? Yeah, clearly they're coming into the United States. You can see here that the majority of the people that are in the Caribbean or Central America, they're not following this pathway through Mexico. The majority of them are taking a sea route and they are going in through Florida. But where are the Mexicans coming through? Yeah, they're coming through the southern border right here, okay? You can see right here, according to this graphic, that based on the size of the arrow will increase how many, the volume. So this one is over 5.6 million, and this was over a 30-year time period, or a time period. Which one seems to have the lowest number of people coming in? Which one is the lowest number of people coming into the US? If you said Belize, you got it. Okay, here's Belize, this tiny little one. Some of you might have accidentally said Panama because they are there. Okay, which one's the next largest? What's the second largest? Second largest, Dominican Republic. Okay, this is an island that's shared with Haiti. But you can definitely see lots of people are coming in. They're moving across a country border, so international. So that could be American or people from the United States into Canada. That could be people from the United Kingdom into France. That could be people from Germany into the United Kingdom. These have to cover country borders. Okay, it would not be international if they didn't cross a country border. An internal migrant or internal migration, remember this is a flashcard, internal migration, these guys are moving within their own country borders, but it still does imply a degree of permanence, meaning I am from California, I'm tired of paying super high taxes, the population there is getting out of control, I would like to move somewhere else. I'm going to move to Utah, which is a really common scenario. We are getting a ton of people filtering into Utah from California specifically. And this is an example of internal migration. They did not leave the United States, okay? They might feel like it because they're probably going to be in for a culture shock, a climate shock. There are different modes of speech. There's going to be different preferences for the locals compared to the Californians, but they're still internal. They didn't leave the US. You can see right here that this is domestic migration between 1995 to the year 2000. So I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions about this graphic to see if you could come up with the answer. So the first question that I'd like to ask you is, name a state that had a relatively high rate of domestic migration. A high rate of domestic migration. Okay, if you said Nevada or Arizona, absolutely correct. And again, we're just looking here. You can see that these numbers here are actually a negative number. Okay, so let's try this again. Tell me a place that has a low net internal migration. Low net internal. Okay, if you identified New York, good job. If you identified Alaska or Hawaii, also great job. Okay, now more specific. This time I don't want you to tell me a place, I want you to tell me a region. Identify a region on this map that has a high rate of domestic migration. A high rate, a region. Okay, there are two number one answers. Let's see if you could come up with it. The first answer, the one that jumps out at me the most, is the South. So if you said the South, good answer. You could definitely refer to this as the South. I know Florida isn't typically considered the South, but I think including these states right here, you'd be good. If you said the Pacific Northwest, that's also a very good answer. Okay, now let's do the opposite. Identify a region that seems to have low internal migration. Low internal migration. Identify a region. All right. If you said the Plains areas, oh yeah, for sure. Okay, you got Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, that's the Plains region. If you said New England, maybe, okay, I'd go with New England. If you said the Northeast, I would go for that. If you said kind of the Great Lakes region, or if you said the St. Lawrence River Valley, awesome answers. Okay, you're clearly understanding this well. So there are two different types of movement, okay? So we're still kind of talking about migration and how people are moving, and one of them is called cyclic. So cyclic movement is movement away from your home for a short period of time. This is what you and I do every day, okay? We commute to school. We are not permanent residents here at the school. I know, as funny as that sounds, teachers don't actually live at school. We really have homes. So we are all involved in cyclic movement, and this is everyday movement. You and I are doing this every single day. It's cyclic when I go to the cafeteria. It's cyclic when I use the restroom. It's cyclic when I head over to my friend's house. It's cyclic when I go to the grocery store. Okay, I'm definitely moving. I'm migrating in a sense, but it's not a permanent. It's not permanent, and that's what these two are examples of. These are non-permanent types of migration. Seasonal movement is an example of this one. So seasonal movement might be, for example, we see a lot of seasonal movement during the summer seasons, especially at our national parks. We get a ton of people coming into the United States from outside of the US. Yellowstone National Park, for one, is an example. It's really fun to see their little name tags because you can see their name and it also tells you where they actually came from. Okay, the other type of movement is periodic movement. This one means that they're moving away from home for a longer period of time. So this is not like cyclic where you're moving for a short period. Periodic movement implies that they are kind of staying in that location for a little bit of time. So for example, a migrant that is working somewhere else. We have a lot of people from the Philippines, for example, who move to Saudi Arabia for a handful of months throughout the year. Can you imagine why they might do that? If you were thinking that it was for jobs, specifically in the oil field, you were correct. A lot of people will move from places like the Philippines and they will be guest workers living among the locals for an extended period of time, but it's not their permanent residence. Another example of this would be transhumans, and that's going to be people who are moving livestock. So like your nomadic herders, there's a lot of nomadic herders in Mongolia, for example, and they will be moving their animals, kind of shifting with the climate and shifting with the temperature, and they'll be going across Mongolia. Another example of this is going to be military In the United States, we have a relatively high number of people who are in the military, and they will be stationed outside of the US for a specific amount of time, maybe up to 18 months to a couple of years, and then they will, of course, be coming home because it's not intended to be a permanent move. Types of reasons for movement include forced migration and voluntary migration. I'm actually going to go ahead and change this slide real fast. Okay, so I changed that to say forced migration and voluntary migration. This idea here, usually you will understand pretty simply, but you just may not have understood that there was an actual word or phrase for it. So you have forced migration, which means that people were forced to leave a location. They didn't really have a say in the matter, and they basically were picked up and forced to leave. One of the best examples that we can think of is the slave trade, and that's what this image down here is showing you. The slave trade from Africa into South and Central America, and then of course into the United States. It is one of those graphics similar to one that I showed you for international migration, where the size of the arrow shows you how many people based in millions. There was also other forced migration. Typically, if you have some type of natural disaster, one in modern times was the Fukushima accident that happened in Japan. There was a nuclear power plant that suffered tremendous damage due to a large earthquake that they had there a few years ago, similar to what happened in Chernobyl in the 1980s. Another type of movement is voluntary migration. Voluntary migration doesn't imply that it's forced. It's just like you're volunteering for something. So it's where somebody wants to leave. There wasn't a natural disaster, there's not war, there's nobody that's forcing them to leave. They're making this choice. An example for voluntary migration could be a ton of different reasons, and I've just narrowed down a couple of them to maybe new jobs, economic prospects. Education is typically a pretty big one, or it could just be housing. Distance decay. This weighs into the decision to migrate. So typically, migrants move less far than they originally contemplate. So, for example, you could ask teenagers how or where do they want to live. Very few of you would probably answer with, you want to stay here in Utah. Most of you probably have these big dreams that you want to, live in Europe, or that you want to live abroad, or that you want to go to New York City or move to Los Angeles. And odds are most of you are going to stay here in Utah. Okay, that's what distance decay is. You're generally moving a lot further than you intend. Are some of you going to live abroad? Are some of you going to live outside of the United States? Will some of you leave Utah? Yes. But when you actually look at the statistical information, it's going to show that most of us don't travel as far as we intended. Okay, we're almost done with flashcards. You're doing really well. Just a few more to go. Okay, a few more to go. So step migration. This literally is like a step. I actually like to draw a step on my flashcard for this one because it helps me remember what it is. But it's basically the migrants are following a path of like stages to where their final destination is going to be. So for example, if I wanted to live in New York City, I may not be able to afford the rent in New York City. So I might live maybe in Buffalo, and I might live with some other people in an apartment or rent a house. Then eventually I might be able to move into New York City when I get the ability to afford it. Or it would be kind of like somebody internationally, maybe they're from Honduras and they would like to make their way into the United States, and they're just going to travel by foot. So they're going to gradually work their way up through Central America into Mexico, and they're going to probably stay in a lot of different cities and small towns throughout Mexico as they travel north before they get to the southern border. That is step migration. An intervening opportunity means that somewhere along that path that they're taking, they might have something stop them to make them stay there longer, or might make them push them out of there faster. And we'll talk about push and pull factors in the next video.